Welcome to Books in Action. I'm Jim Horton. We're talking with Maplewood author, columnist, magazine editor Alan Paul, and particularly this evening about this book, his book on Big in China. And I'd like to start off this talk with something we were talking about just before we came on the air, is how did you do it with 3 young children? And it was 4 years, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Well, you had nothing to it but to do it. Like anything, to put one foot in front of the other and take a step. It was challenging at times, flying back and forth with 3 young kids. When we first moved to China, our children were 2, 4, and 7. So the idea on this end of deciding to move to China from Maplewood with 3 young kids seemed very exotic to a lot of people. When we actually got there, we were living in an expat compound, a walled compound, filled with people with young children. As soon as I got there and was on the playground, it no longer seemed quite so exotic. But the actual plane travel could be very, very challenging. There's no two ways about it. And after we were there for a couple of years, people would always come to us when they were, going to have big trips and ask us for advice, as if we'd become some sort of experts from having done it a few times. And sometimes I would tell them the only thing that really changes, and this sounds so stupid, but the acknowledgement, the understanding you have inside yourself that it is going to end. And that although 13 or 14 hours on a plane with a toddler is interminable, in fact, it does end. You come to the other side. But on all of those flights, there was always a point, usually about 6 or 7 hours in. I mean, you would watch a couple of movies. Maybe with the kids, once they were 6, 7, 8, they'd be playing their Game Boys at the time before DSs, read books, draw, tell stories, go for a couple of walks, play with other kids, have a couple of meals, and you're feeling, this is fine, this is okay, this is exhausting, but it's okay. Mm-hmm. We must be doing okay. Then you look and you go, I got 7 more hours. And at that point, usually when I always would have the thought that I wonder if I could screw my head off and put it in the overhead compartment. Either that or maybe screw my kid's head off and put it in. But eventually, somehow you get them to sleep usually, and next thing you know, you're there. And it's like every other painful thing, you have amnesia very quickly. So as soon as you get off the plane and you get something to eat, and you get back to your house, in our case in Beijing, you settle down, and you go, it wasn't that bad. But during those hours, it's a long march to nowhere.
So to go all the way back to the beginning, you and your wife had the opportunity, she to be the bureau chief in Beijing for the Wall Street Journal, right. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And you as being the freelance editor for...
Right. Well, I didn't know quite what I was going to do in China. I was working for about the 10 years or so prior to moving as a contract writer for Guitar World and Slam magazines. Uh-huh. Both magazines I had long relationships with, and they were very kind to say, continue the relationship as much as I could work it out, but I had to give up the regular steady gig. So that was a bit intimidating and a little bit scary, but I just thought that the China opportunity was it held so much possibility that it was something we had to do. I wasn't quite sure what I would do. I did feel that no matter what happened, we'd be better at the end of it for having had this experience, lived outside our culture, and hopefully understand China a little bit better, which though I was no expert on China, I did understand it was a increasingly important nation. So I just thought it would be positive for all of us, no matter what.
And you had been living in Maplewood for some years, right?
We'd been in Maplewood at that point for 7 years.
Right, so you were pretty settled in the community with relatives and family around.
That's right. We were very happy here, and we weren't looking to move. In fact, Rebecca had a couple of possibilities pop up at the paper over the previous few years in Chicago, San Francisco, Washington. They weren't jobs that were offered to her. They were jobs that became available that she would have been a strong candidate for had she gone for them. And I really discouraged her and said, I don't want to move from Maplewood. We were very happy here. We like it. We still like it, which made coming back a lot easier. But this was just different. I mean, China's not Chicago. So.
Yeah, exotic to say the least. And I do remember in one section in the book where you found a slam reader among your Chinese...
I found quite a few Slam readers, which was amazing, and Guitar World readers, which was just amazing, because Slam and Guitar World what they have in common, they're obviously very different, but they're both large niche magazines that are very important to the people who read them and don't really mean anything to anyone else. So people, when you tell someone you're a senior writer for Guitar World or Slam, it either is the coolest thing in the world or it's absolutely nothing. It doesn't have the wide recognition of a Sports Illustrated or Rolling Stone, for instance. But what you're referring to is very early in my time in China and Beijing. In the first few weeks, I had gone to get my first long-term multi-entry visa. Had to go to the large Chinese police station, which I ended up going to quite often to deal with these kind of visa issues. But this was my first time there, and I was very intimidated. I was registered as the SLAM Beijing bureau chief, which was really sort of a ruse that SLAM was helping me with because I wanted to be a credentialed journalist. And so they offered to open up the Beijing bureau with me as its chief so that I would be an officially licensed journalist in China. I had already done that, so when I went to the police station, that was attached to my paperwork. I was there with Mr. Doe, who was the driver for the Wall Street Journal and also sort of the facilitator who helped us navigate the Chinese bureaucracy. So we walked into this large police station. I was very intimidated. I'd only been in China for about 2 or 3 weeks. Everything still seemed very exotic and different. And in my interactions with the government, I certainly felt at that point quite intimidated. These were all uniformed Chinese police officers behind desks, long lines of people. Mr. Doe walked right to the front of a line, which immediately made me a little nervous of sort of looking around, and dropped a big stack of papers in front of a very officious-looking officer who kind of looked up and nodded at me, nodded at Mr. Doe, who he knew, and he started going through all the papers, which was a big stack for my children and I. And in China, there's something called a chop, which is basically an official red stamp that seals something. It's like a signature. Nothing's official without the chop. And he was chopping all our papers. So he's going through, chop, 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 and he suddenly stops chopping and starts reading one of the papers with great interest and sort of looking at it. And looking up at me and looking down and looking up. And so I'm thinking, uh-oh, what is going on here? And he suddenly looks up, gave me a big smile, and said, "I very like Slam." So the paper he had gotten to was my credentials as the Slam bureau chief. And I was just astounded. I had no idea the man could speak English. And I certainly didn't expect him to say that. So I said, "Thank you very much. I very like China." And he said, "Who do you think is best Chinese basketball player, not Yao Ming?" I really had not begun to explore Chinese basketball yet. I did become quite knowledgeable about it, but I didn't know much yet. So I said, "Well, you tell me who you like the best. You'll help me to learn about it." And we had a long back and forth about Chinese basketball players, the CBA versus the NBA. Mr. Doe watched this with this shocked expression, like as I think I said in the book, of someone who looked like he was hearing two cats speak human language. So afterwards, the two of them had a very animated conversation in Chinese, and Mr. Doe looked at me and laughed. And I did feel that after that point, something changed in the way he regarded me, because I think he was puzzled trying to figure out who I was as this guy who didn't seem to work or do much of value while his wife was Mr. Doe's boss. And this officer, who I nicknamed him Officer Hoops, became my friend. I saw him every year when I went back for the visas. I brought him some Slam magazines. He called me, eventually invited me to some basketball games, and I went and played pickup basketball with him and his friends. So you never know. I mean, I had no idea. I knew that Slam had a certain power over its readers. Had no idea it extended to China. So that was incredible.
You discovered an enormous number of things in China, and one of them that we were talking about before we went on the air was your ability to travel in the interior with your family, which I thought was extraordinary, since, as you mentioned, some expats don't leave the compound at all, and yet you seem to pack up the family and go inland to the rural districts without a qualm.
We arrived in China in mid-August, and the first national holiday we had was October 1st. The first week of October is a national holiday. So we had a week off. Kids were off of school. Rebecca's office was shut for at least half the week out of respect for the Chinese employees. So we had opportunity to go away, and we really didn't know what we were going to do, where we were going to go. And I asked some people, hey, where should we go? And one Austrian woman, who's the mother of a friend of Eli, my 5-year-old, gave me the name of a couple of places that she liked. I looked them up in a book. I didn't know anything. One of them was a place called Yangshuo, which is near Guilin in southern China. I looked at it, I just thought it looked like a remarkable place. Literally looked at 2 pictures in a guidebook and said, let's go here. Contacted a travel agent, she recommended, she booked it. We enjoyed down there going off the beaten path more than we enjoyed staying on the beaten path. It already is a sort of a rural place, but we had a guide who took us on bikes way off into the countryside. It was an incredible experience. Our 2-year-old, Anna, was we had told them we needed a children's seat on the bike. Oh, no problem, no problem, no problem. We got up there, no children's seat, we need a children's seat. No problem, no problem, no problem. She goes in the back, she's rooting through all this stuff, and she came out with like a wicker basket and tied it onto the back of the bike with wire and put Anna in it, and then we were sort of like, wow, that's the kid's seat, huh? And there was no front on it. And I said, there's no front. You know, she went to, oh, no problem, no problem, no problem. They took a sheet and tied it. So it sort of was going to work fine as long as she consented to stay. If a kid started fidgeting, it was going to be trouble. But she stayed. We went out. We rode around these bumpy roads with some care for her to not fall out. We had 2 tandem bikes with her tied on the back of one. And it was just incredible. We rode through fields with women plowing them with water buffalo, and we went off on little bamboo rafts, and we saw cormorant fishermen fishing in this traditional old way where they have a cormorant on a leash who goes in and cormorant's like a big duck-like bird, you know.
Yeah.
They go down and they catch the fish, but they can't swallow it because they have a choker on them. And they come out with this giant fish sticking out of their mouth that the guys pull out and throw in a basket. And it was just, you know, it was incredible. And so that was sort of a great fluke, and very happy it happened early in our time there. We all had a blast. And so after that, we set out to find adventures off the beaten path whenever we could. Sometimes we probably went a little too far off the beaten path because you can end up in the weeds pretty quickly when you get out there in rural China.
Okay, well, we're going to have to take a break here in a few seconds, but I want to say once again that the book is Big in China. The author is Alan Paul, good Maplewood resident, and it is a fascinating account of a family in China for 4 years. And we will, in the second part of our conversation here, I would like to get into your guitar playing. I think I would like to focus on that, if that's all right with you.
Absolutely.
Okay. I'm Jim Horton. This is Books in Action, and we'll be right back.
It's so easy to get caught up in the rush of things. Managing school, your job, and your friends can be a full-time task, especially when you're starting to drive. But the one thing teenagers don't understand is that combining the two means dangerous driving, not only to you, but to the others around you. Don't drive dangerously.
Welcome back to Books in Action. I'm Jim Horton. We're talking with Alan Paul, who has written this book, Big in China, which is a wonderful story about taking his entire family with 3 children and living for 4 years in Beijing while his wife was the bureau chief of the Wall Street Journal, and you were the contract freelance writer for 2 magazines. But the thing that I think that we haven't covered, that I would like to cover in this next section, is your best blues band in Beijing.
Right.
Which I think your story about getting into music over there is just fascinating. Would you like to pick it up, please?
Sure. Well, we won the best band in Beijing, not the best blues band. I worked for Guitar World for 15 years prior to going, so I had been very involved in music. I spent a lot of time interviewing people, the Allman Brothers and Eric Clapton and Metallica, and this was what I did. I played guitar as well, performed with some friends and stuff, but never to what I would consider a professional level, never in a steady gigging band. Right before we moved to China, I was playing a fair amount and sort of excited to play. I got over there, nothing quite clicked during the first year. I met a few guys I thought was going to have partnerships with, and they sort of fizzled for one reason or another. One guy was moving to Hong Kong the next day, it turned out. So nothing much happened on that front. I came back to Maplewood over the summer. I saw some of my great friends here who I played music with. We had two great jam sessions, which reignited my passion for music and reignited my determination to play more music in Beijing. So I bought a new guitar, an Epiphone 335, for those of you who care about such things, to help spark my passion and my interest. I got it back to Beijing, ran up to my office, opened it up, excited to tune it up and play some Welcome to Beijing licks, and the headstock was dangling off. It had broken in transit, which was a very depressing sight. So I sort of shoved it back in the case for a few days because I couldn't deal with it. I was too upset. And then when I began to process it, it is a very fixable break, but you need a really good repairman. Mm-hmm. So I started looking for someone, and I inquired to some friends who'd been around town and knew such things, and they both recommended Woody Wu, who was a young Chinese guy back from 3 or 4 years in Australia and running this guitar shop. He spoke good English and could help me out. So I sent him an email, and I'd always been shy about dropping the Guitar World thing in guitar shops because guys would start try to show off, and I'm not that kind of guitar player. So, but in this case, I was in China. I wanted to make sure I got good service from this guy with the cool name, Woody Wu. So I sent him an email and said, "This is Alan Paul from Guitar World. I'm in Beijing. I've got a broken guitar. Hope you can help me out." Explained what the situation was. And the Guitar World thing worked, so he wrote me back pretty quickly and said, "I've looked you up on the internet, you've interviewed so many of my friends, I'd love to meet you and fix your guitar, bring it down." So we made a date, I brought the guitar down and meet him at his shop. He came out to meet me, and he was a young guy. I had just turned 40, he was 28, covered black hair in his face, 4 or 5 earrings in each ear, big nose ring, covered in tattoos, hip wallet chain around his hip. So, sort of different kind of guy that I had been meeting so far. And took me up to basically told me he could fix the guitar. I had a guy look at it with him, and they talked about it, and no problem. He wanted to talk, let's have a Coke. He wanted to talk about Guitar World and my experiences. I just wanted to talk about music and Beijing rock bands. I just thought, here's this cool young guy who can take me around to see bands. That's what I thought would be a guide to the music scene. We hadn't talked about what kind of music he liked yet. I assumed from his age and the way he looked that he would have been like a metal guy. Uh-huh. I'm more of a blues guy. Woody took off his jean jacket he was wearing, and yet it was covered in tats, and they were mostly sort of designs, but I saw a familiar face on his left arm. And so finally I said, "Hey man, what's that?" Because I couldn't quite see it. And he pulled up his shirt sleeve, and from about there to there on his left arm, he had Stevie Ray Vaughan, the great Texas blues guitarist. And I was just blown away. I said, "Wow, Stevie Ray, wow." So we started talking, changed the whole focus of our discussion. I had written liner notes for Stevie Ray Vaughan box set, and it turned out of all the stuff, that was what he saw online that made him want to meet me. We shared a passion for Stevie Ray Vaughan and for the blues, and we started talking, and he invited me to jam with his band, and that was a sort of a beautiful friendship and relationship.
So you started playing with him, and you also played with a gentleman from the...
That's right, Dave Levenger, who was a saxophone player, another American, right, who was a friend from my compound, lived around the corner. We had had a couple of jam sessions. I did start playing a little bit prior to meeting Woody, or maybe it was a little bit after I met Woody before we got together. I had a couple of jams with Dave. Then I had that jam with Woody. Both of them I thought were fantastic musicians, really above me, like they were here and I was here. But they both seemed to enjoy playing with me for whatever reason. So I thought, wow, I got these two guys, such great musicians that want to play with me. I owe it to myself to just see where this will go. And I didn't know if the saxophone and Woody's slide guitar playing would work together, but I wanted to try. So we did. We had a couple of rehearsals, and I had a friend who owned a restaurant nearby that had music sometimes, and she had been wanting to go in a more acoustic direction, had asked me if I would host an acoustic open mic. So originally that's all it was supposed to be. We were going to play 4 or 5 songs at an open mic and see what happened. And we ended up playing 2 hours that night. A couple other people came for the open mic. One guy got up and jammed with us. The other guys got intimidated and left. And I think really had more to do with Dave and Woody than me. But I was able to hang in there, and that just, we kept going from there. The response, and, there were a lot of people there. Response everything felt good, it went well, and it encouraged us to keep going. We got some more gigs.
And you got better and better.
Got better and better. We brought in different musicians. We brought in bass and drums. We went through a series of different guys. We had a Ugandan guy playing congos for at one point. We had a Chinese upright bass player. We had a Mexican percussion player. We had a Canadian drummer. It was all sort of like who could come to a gig. And then Woody brought in this bass player named Zhang Yang, who was just fantastic. Woody didn't tell me at first. He told me down the road. Zhang Yang was quite well known in Chinese rock circles. He had just left a modern Chinese rock band called ZUA, which means like Confucius says. He had played with them for 7 years. Was pretty well known. Then he brought in a drummer named Lu Wei, great drummer, who played in a lot of Beijing bands. And all of a sudden, I was fronting a Chinese band with Dave also joining me on the sax, who were just phenomenal. And we started to realize we could be pretty good, and I felt that I was the weak link, although I had already improved quite a bit, but I made a very I was self-conscious of the fact that I was the weak link, and I was the band leader. It was sort of a strange place to be. I couldn't hide. So I realized, there's a chance here to do something, but I have to suck it up and really up my game, and I did. I do feel that a lot of it probably was within me, but I needed to be challenged and pushed to bring it out, and I don't know if I ever would have.
One really off-the-wall question here, but where did you get the time? You could not have been sleeping a great deal during this period.
Yeah, I mean...
Because you were playing sometimes well into the night, were you not?
Well, by the time the band really, when we first started playing, the first few months, like before Lu Wei and Zhang Yang, and maybe in the early days with them, we were playing a couple times a month. Then we started getting better and better, and soon we were playing once a week. Then we were playing twice a week, caused some tensions at times at home, also with Dave and his family. But I found time by just making it a priority. We got to a certain point, early in the process. Becky, my wife, probably felt more. Hey, well, what are you doing? Going out and playing every weekend. We reached a certain point where it became obvious to everyone, including her, that this had the potential to really be something, and we all understood that. She didn't question that anymore, and I didn't question it myself. I mean, I had my doubts early on too, but we reached a point, and part of it was that we had this unique situation of 2 Americans and 3 Chinese guys interacting. And it was really interacting. We were a band. It wasn't like I had hired these guys to play my music behind me. It was very collaborative. Eventually, we started adding Chinese songs written and sung by Zhang Yang, the bass player. He never mentioned that he could sing. I just happened to find out when I went to see him play with another band, because I was in the neighborhood. He played in this cover band in 5-star hotels, as his money gig. And I sort of stumbled in there one night and like, oh my God, he's a great singer. He had never told me because he felt that I'd hired him as a bass player, and that was his job. And eventually down the road, I realized that as much as I learned from them, which was a lot, and again, they inspired me and pushed and pulled so much out of me. At the same time, I helped teach them a more relaxed way to make music in a more collaborative way, in a way in which it's okay for the bass player to make a suggestion and not just shut up and play his part.
One thing that we haven't mentioned that is, while you're doing all this, plus getting the kids to school in the morning, you were also writing a column for the Wall Street Journal, and won Columnist of the Year. Is that not correct?
That is correct. Yeah, everything kind of came together. Oh, I was writing the column almost the whole time. I started the column about 5 or 6 months into my time in China. So by the time the band started, I was already pretty well established as a columnist. the band started becoming less of just a fun thing that I did every once in a while and more of a, serious pursuit, like, hey, maybe we could be pretty good, sort of at the start of my third year, by which time I was already really cranking away on the column. It is hard to explain, even to myself sometimes, how I did all this. Frankly, I mean, it all worked together. I know it's hard to explain, but I was in such a good creative place. I don't know if I would have had the confidence to get out there and do the band and put myself out there if I hadn't already had the success with the column, for instance. I mean, I'm proud of my music and what we did, but first and foremost, I'm a writer. Definitely, that's where I feel most confident. That's what I've been doing for years and practicing and honing my craft. So, the column was a great reiteration to me that I could do this, that I could write beyond the guitar world and slam worlds and reach people, and in the same way that I could reach people in the guitar world and slam world. So that helped me be more confident of myself and my instincts and my hunches to just pursue them. So that when the band started and I had this instinct and this hunch that we had something, I think I pursued it more aggressively than I might have. So somehow it all worked together. The kids were also a bit older. By the third year, they were not so little. Anna, the littlest, is a fiercely independent kid. She was only four or five, I guess, but she was well established in China. By that time, we had an IE or a nanny who she was very comfortable with, and we were comfortable with her. So it became easier for me to get out there and do that. I never, if for some chance I had met Woody and those guys in the first year I was in China, none of this could have happened. I mean, I wouldn't have had the confidence to get out there in China. I wouldn't have been comfortable leaving the kids as much. So it all came together in its own pace.
Well, we're just about running out of time, but you're now back and you're settled in Maplewood. Do you maintain contact with everybody in China?
I do. I'm actually going back to China June 11th, and
Terrific.
I'm looking forward to it. I'm going to be doing a bunch of readings to promote the book, meeting with some Chinese publishers. I'm hoping to have the book published in Chinese, and I'll be performing with the guys in the band, which I'm really looking forward to. So part of my heart and soul always, I guess, will be in China now, which is really extraordinary to me. I wasn't somebody who had spent years thinking about China. I wasn't a sinologist. I mean, once we lived over there, I met a lot of people and became friends with a lot of people who really had spent their lives being China-focused and China-centered, and had dreamed of living in China, had worked their whole lives towards the opportunity to live in China. That wasn't us. So I feel all the more blessed and lucky that this all happened, really, because it wasn't a lifetime goal.
Okay, well, thank you very, very much for coming on the program. The book, once again, is Big in China, Alan Paul, Maplewood resident. Wonderful book. I urge you to buy it and read it. This is Books in Action. I'm Jim Horton, and thank you very much for watching.
Thank you.
So